The Virginia Cases. Number 1. Rachel Nicole Good. Rachel Good disappeared in October of 2003. She was just 20 years old at the time and 10 weeks pregnant. She had 3 children already, but the young woman looked forward to what life could bring her. The last time anyone saw her, she was hanging out with some of her friends in the parking lot behind the Elkton Volunteer Fire Department. This was in Elkton, Virginia, at approximately 6 p.m. on October 18, 2003. Rachel's friends watched her get into her Dodge Neon and drive away like anyone normally would. There was no sign of distress and no hint of what was to come. Her car was found at her home on the 100 block of Virginia Avenue in Elkton, but Rachel was gone. Rachel's parents were alarmed, and they reported her missing that same day. The responding officer who would work her case was Adam Williams, or at least everyone believed he was investigating her missing person case. That is, until 4 days later, when Rachel's parents discovered letters written between Officer Williams and Rachel. This is when her parents discovered that Rachel had a secret. She'd been having an affair with Williams, who was married. She was also carrying his baby. Once the truth came out, the Elkton police put Williams on paid administrative leave. And with this, he resigned from the police force in January of 2004, and he quickly moved out of state. This case, however, was not so easy. Rachel's body has never been found, and without a body, charges were never filed. Her parents filed a $50,000 wrongful death suit against the police, the town of Elkton, and Adam Williams. It's unclear when these cases were filed, but in 2014, a judge dismissed the case against the police and the town. This left Adam Williams alone as the sole defendant. Williams then filed suit to have it dismissed on the grounds that it was past the statute of limitations. In 2018, a judge ruled against Williams in the plea for dismissal. However, if the case has been heard, I can't find any publicity about it. To put this whole case into perspective, my daughter was born the same year that Rachel went missing, in 2003. When Williams resigned, my child was a toddler. My daughter was then 13 when Williams was finally brought into court as part of a wrongful death suit. She was 15 when he lost his plea for dismissal. Now it appears nothing's been done, and my child's 19 now. I can't imagine how excruciating that has to be for her parents. They're not even able to bury their child. There's children that have no idea what happened to their mother. Her father gave an interview saying that Rachel had a rough childhood. Her parents divorced, and she used to call her dad to report mistreatment by her stepfather in the form of taking all of her things to punish her, even taking her bed and forcing her to sleep on the floor. She would also complain that there wasn't food in the refrigerator, but he was a truck driver and he was unable to care for her full time. She reportedly fell into the wrong crowd. There wasn't a lot of parental supervision. And by the end, she had 3 children, but seemed to be turning her life around. Her father agreed to lend her $100 shortly before she went missing, with one stipulation, that she attend church on Sunday. She seemed to be doing better, and her last conversation with her father was when she told him that she was dating a police officer, but she didn't give his name. She showed him a voicemail, and that voicemail was later heard and proven to be Officer Williams. Those who knew her said that Officer Williams was the baby's father. They also said that he was married. They had been together 3 or 4 months, and she was pregnant. There was one big complication, though. It's not clear what he did in those 4 days. Whether or not he was using that time to cover his tracks is unknown. He certainly didn't tell the truth that he knew the victim. Adam Williams chose not to tell his supervisors that Rachel was his secret girlfriend. A report did come in to say that she had been buried in a well on land near Lake Arrowhead, but the police have chosen not to dig up the well because they say the price tag would be about $12,000. There's no public indication of who owns the house where the well is located, but they do note that it was completely renovated at the time. It appears that Adam's wife had no idea about the affair. Rachel's father surmised that perhaps Rachel had threatened to expose it, perhaps because of her pregnancy. They believed that no matter what it was that was said, that he involved his father. That said, it's just a theory without evidence. But there is a reason why he feels this way. He explained that he called Adam Williams' father and instead reached his mother in Florida, speaking to her on the phone. It was then he learned that Adam's father would make an annual trip to Virginia in April or May of every year. But in 2003, he made the trip in October, at the same time that Rachel disappeared. It is important to note that neither Adam or his father have been charged. There were multiple attempts at civil lawsuits before the last one was allowed to finally stand. Rachel left behind her parents and a brother, as well as 3 children that deserve answers. Children that are adults now. By her remains not being found, it kept her killer or killers from paying for what they did. Rachel was declared dead in 2010. If anyone has any information at all on this case, or regarding where she may be, who took her life, or even what was going on in her life at that time, please call the number on your screen. Her family deserves to know what happened. While her family is working in civil court right now, it's their only option to hold Adam Williams responsible. Her father told the Washington Post, "All I want is to know where she's at. That's all I want so I can bring her home." He said this in an interview that ended up not being published, but instead going to Chris Slater's blog. The link to that blog can be found below. It appears the civil case is still pending against Williams. Rachel has been missing for 19 years. Had she lived, she would be 38 today. Her unborn child would be 18. Number 2. Rebecca Ann Crist, Staunton, Virginia. She preferred to be called by her middle name of Ann. It was a typical day in 1988, and Ann was hanging out with her sister in her apartment when a phone call came in. Ann was 25 and the mother of a young son. She asked her sister if she'd mind watching her toddler-aged son, and the last time anyone saw her, she was seen walking away from her West Beverly Street apartment shortly after lunch. The 25-year-old mother never returned, and that was not normal at all. Ann was a great mom who seemed happy. She wasn't involved in drugs. There was no evidence of foul play, and her family insists she would not leave her son willingly. She stood around 5 feet tall, had red hair, and she weighed around 115 pounds. That same night, at midnight, her mother was in Ann's apartment watching her grandson and worrying about where Ann could be. The phone rang at midnight, and her mom frantically answered, but there was no voice at the other end. Her family and friends all willingly submitted to interviews, and they did what they could to cooperate. But those interviews didn't unearth any clues as to what might have happened. The police believe she left of her own accord, even though she had prepaid her rent a month ahead of time, just the day before. Her phone records were never requested by the police. It appears they might have tried to get them a year later when she was still missing, but by then it was too late. Her disappearance happened one day before she was to attend a hearing for the paternity of her son. It's also believed she was 3 months pregnant at the time she went missing, but this is not confirmed as a solid fact. In 1991, a letter arrived addressed to her family, located in Staunton, Virginia, confessed to killing her by accident, saying he disposed of her body in a local landfill. The authorities took it seriously, but they couldn't verify any part of his story, and he's currently incarcerated for another crime. Police also note that a neighbor of Ann's went missing just a few months before she did. He was a retired postal worker, and his body was eventually recovered from the basement of his home. It turned out he'd been shot by his son-in-law, who is now in prison for that crime. A cadaver dog was used in that case, and he hit upon a spot at the end of the paved driveway, and this led the police to believe there was another body in that spot. his son-in-law, Robert Asbury, who was ultimately sentenced to 45 years in prison. The area had been paved several years before Ann went missing, so it's doubtful they hit upon that spot has anything to do with her. They also offered the son-in-law of Raymond a deal. If he confessed to Rebecca's murder, he would receive no additional prison time. They just wanted the truth. He declined to confess and maintained that he was innocent. The police were inclined to believe him. Ann Crist's parents have since passed away in the years that followed. Her sisters and her son are still alive, and they desperately want to know what happened to Ann. After the 25th anniversary of her disappearance, her sisters pushed for more information, passing out flyers and looking for new leads. It unfortunately didn't help uncover anything new. So if you have any information at all, please call the number on your screen. Rebecca Ann Crist was 25 when she went missing. She's been missing for 34 years and would be 59 if still alive today. Number 3, Keith Whitmore, from Greenville, Virginia. Keith was an incredibly hard worker who worked as a maintenance mechanic at the Hershey plant in Virginia. He managed to retire early thanks to his savings, and he did this a few years before he turned 50. So it was a pretty big accomplishment. Sadly, he didn't get to enjoy it. Not for very long anyway. While working, he was described as someone who worked hard but kept to himself, although he was always willing to lend a helping hand to others who needed it. Something started to change with Keith, however. As the years wound on, he began to distance himself from his family. He purchased a house that was outside Greenville, but it was in a pretty secluded area. And from there on out, he pretty much tried to avoid people. His main interaction was simply going into town to pick up Chinese takeout once a week. His family hasn't seen Keith since July of 2015. That last interaction was when Keith went to visit his father on his deathbed. This was the last time his sister Kim saw him. He came to pay his respects and bid his father goodbye. His family said he was the old reasonable Keith. He didn't seem any different, and the family enjoyed their get-together. But then Kim began trying to reach Keith. She called, but there was no answer. She sent messages on social media, and he answered some at first, but they trickled down into nothing. She resorted to sending letters, but only silence. Now we know he was alive in this time and that he was still living in his house, despite the fact that he stopped contacting his family. Kim decided she wanted to see her brother in the spring of 2018, and that was it. She was going to do it. She stopped by her brother's house with her grandsons. She had an ulterior motive too. She'd hoped that Keith could be a good male Christian role model for her boys. But Keith wasn't there. She kept stopping by, and his cars were always in the driveway, and the porch light was on. She eventually called in a wellness check, and the police did attempt to contact him in May of 2018. But the only note refers to them saying he didn't answer the door. If anyone is wondering about welfare checks and the fact the police just knocked, I can explain a little bit from my own experience. I have called in dozens of welfare checks from a social service job that I used to have. I never had cops break into the door like you see on TV. We did many times get a landlord to let the police in, and then they would come out and tell me the result. Quite often there was actually somebody inside. They were choosing not to answer the door. I can't recall ever having a client I needed to call on that owned their own home, so I can't really say what the process would be with that, but far more than once we weren't able to reach a landlord and nothing happened. It just resulted in the police making a note that they tried to get someone to come to the door, and that they either wouldn't or couldn't. At least here, they couldn't break in unless they had cause. His family kept checking on him, and in June, the porch light went off. It turned out the reason was that the power had been cut for non-payment. It turns out the mortgage, however, hadn't been paid in months. So while Keith was missing from his family for about 7 years, it's pretty clear it was 2018 when he actually disappeared. Especially since an acquaintance that knew him by sight saw Keith in 2018. Left behind were Keith Whitmore's vehicles, his clothing, and what appeared to be all of his belongings. The only thing missing was his wallet and his cell phone. The police and his family think it was possible he fully expected to return. His sister stated that when hunting season approaches each fall in the mountains of Virginia, she hopes that a hunter or hiker will come across a clue, believing that that's where he is, and that it will finally lead to answers about her brother's disappearance. She asked that if anyone finding a backpack or a hat, report back to the police. Keith Whitmore always wore a hat, mainly his University of Virginia hat, which says UVA on the front. The only problem I can see with this theory is that all of his vehicles were there. If he went hunting, how is that possible? But there could be more known that has not been released. Keith Whitmore has been missing for 5 years. Number 4. Robert Ray Fitzgerald, missing from Staunton, Virginia since November 12, 2012. Robert Fitzgerald went by the name Bobby, and he was 60 and very physically fit. He was a man who enjoyed hiking, and he's been missing since November of 2012. He was last seen hiking in the area of the Confederate Breastworks Trail on Shenandoah Mountain. On November 12, 2012, Bobby had visited his elderly mother, who was in her 90s at the time. He then stopped at a local convenience store. It's believed that after he left the store, he headed up Shenandoah Mountain, which is part of Staunton. The mountain itself borders Augusta County and Highland County. The day prior, he'd also hiked up that mountain, but with a female friend. It was reported that he'd accidentally lost a shirt and a cell phone. The working belief is that he went back up there to search for his missing items. He had no idea, but it turns out that another hiker had already found his missing phone. The Augusta County Sheriff's Office has video footage of Bobby and his female friend with a dog from the prior day. The video came from a vehicle-mounted camera that was filming on Shenandoah Mountain at the time, but there was no such filming the next day. Bobby wasn't reported missing until days later when he failed to show up for work on November 15, 2012. It was a job he'd worked for 30 years, and it wasn't like him not to show up. It was this that clued in the authorities something was wrong. Authorities arranged for a search of the area, quickly finding his abandoned car at the Confederate Breastworks parking lot. Shortly after the search was first initiated, inside his 2001 Kia, they discovered his trail pack, which contained power bars, bottles of water, a flashlight, and a rain poncho. For 5 days, searchers climbed over 50 miles of trails. Because he was so fit, it was believed he could possibly last longer. They covered 4,500 acres by the end, with around 200 people searching. This included canine dogs. While they have video proof he was on the mountain the day before, there was nothing on the next day to prove he'd returned, other than his vehicle. The canines didn't even hit upon a scent. A man named Lowell Sheets is a local businessman, and according to the report, he helps the police solve local crimes. It was he who spoke to a reporter along with Bobby's best friend. It was Mr. Sheets who mentioned suicide, saying it was because Bobby's home was a mess and they found old food inside of his stove. He says that this indicates he may have been depressed. I'd love to know what other people think because, to me, it's a big leap. He went on to say that his car was a mess too, and that was further proof. He commented that Bobby lived on the periphery within his social group, going to functions but saying he didn't immerse himself socially with others. This too, to me anyway, seems like a tenuous link to depression. Sheets also suggested that Bobby wouldn't have gone back to the mountain for his phone because it was a flip phone, saying, it wasn't worth anything. The prevailing theory by the police appears to be that he died of hypothermia on the mountain after possibly being injured, perhaps in a fall. Another is that Bobby was accidentally killed by a hunter during black powder season. I think this theory also belonged to Sheets. It seems like a lot of theories were being thrown about without any kind of proof. He also suggested Bobby may have been killed as part of a gang initiation, or maybe he came across a crime and was silenced. I suppose anything is possible, but I would love to know what people think about this, about throwing out theories like this. I try to report multiple theories if I can, but these seem really random. His friend told a reporter, "There's a certain part of logic that says he's not on the mountain. And if he's not on the mountain, where is he?" Asked if foul play has been ruled out, the Augusta County Sheriff said, "We haven't ruled either way. Currently, he is just gone." I have mentioned before in other videos, but it's a good reminder to watch for remains if you're out hiking, especially if you are off trail. It's easy to dismiss bones as belonging to animals. That's not always the case. And there are a lot of people that are missing. In fact, every year, many people like Bobby go missing in state parks or on various mountains. If you find something, if you don't know it's human or not, please take it to the authorities just in case. I know there's a certain instinct to not bother people or say or do something that might be considered silly, but this is actually very important. Bobby's mother died in 2015 without ever finding out what happened to him. Bobby Fitzgerald was 60 years old when he went missing, and he's presumed deceased. He has been missing for 10 years. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Take care of yourselves and each other.